Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. So, um, as promised, this week I'm gonna focus strictly on my fellow realtors. As you guys know, this is my YouTube channel that I'm growing and building, experimenting with. It's not my primary focus right now, but long term, it will be something that I look to grow to help the masses. But for this week, I just want to focus on my fellow realtors. As you guys know, just left the Mike Ferry sales training event, 50-year anniversary. Congratulations to the Mike Ferry organization, to Mike himself and his wife Sabrina. Um, that's to be commended. 50 years of anything is to be commended, whether that's marriage, 50 years of health, but certainly in business, that is a phenomenal accomplishment. Many quote unquote successful businesses have come and gone in that time. So to remain relevant after 50 years and to remain profitable after 50 years, that's a huge accomplishment. So with that, guys, I'm doing this for twofold. For one, quite a few of you asked me to share my notes that weren't able to attend the event, but also it's a review for me as well. As you guys know, we all can attend events and you'd be really excited, really pumped up, really motivated at the event, but then you get back to your home environment and maybe you don't necessarily have all the all-stars of the game surrounding you, and it's a different type of energy, right? Um, Environment plays such a big part in what we do. But anyway, just so you can see, I do have my Mike Ferry notes literally right out in front of me. So I'm just going to be highlighting some things. Obviously, some of these things will just be reminders. We already know it, but it's good to hear it again. And I'll share a few thoughts of what came to mind for me. Number one, and I'll only be covering day one. So next week will be day two, and obviously the following week, day three, and day four, so forth and so forth. Real estate is all about talking to people. So I think sometimes, and especially as we try to figure out how to integrate technology into our business, whether it be social media, whether it be, well, basically social media, really. Um, there's a question, there's a dynamic of whether we should be marketing more, right? Whether you should have a killer Instagram page, whether you should be doing TikTok videos, or whether or not you should have a phenomenal personal website, maybe, right? Maybe you need to have your name, realtor.com, right? And maybe that should look spectacular. But at the end of the day, the real foundation of this business, if you're going to do a lot of business, of course, is just remembering that real estate is about talking to people. And, obviously our preferred way is, on the phones, but obviously you can do door knocking as well. Some people are venturing with text messaging, but for now, I would say still phones seem to be reigning supreme, followed by door knocking. If you're willing to do that, I would say phones are a little more efficient. But again, if you don't mind going to the doors, you can master that skill, then you have a lot more success because, well, people just have a tougher time slamming the door in your face than compared to, let's say, hanging up a phone or just not answering the phone. And also, if you have a bubbly personality or you present yourself well, then they just get to see you, and it's a different connection than if it's just on the phone, right? Mike also says to have 2 to 3 mentors max, but be open to their thoughts and suggestions. So obviously with social media, there's tons and tons and tons of gurus, experts, industry leaders, if you will, the new and up and coming guy or girl. And Mike says just to focus on 2 or 3 mentors, and he always uses the example, don't come to him, then to go to Tom Ferry, then to go to Brian Buffini, and then someone else, and then say, well, hey, I'm going to take a combination of all of those systems, and then I'm going to create my own, or I'm just going to take the best from, each one. He says, pick a coach, whether it's him or someone else, and follow the system to a T, right? And that just kind of, I'm thinking here on the spot. So I'm just sharing, I'm giving you guys the notes that I'm writing down, but also sharing my thoughts as I read the notes. It reminds me of Gary Keller. Gary Keller wrote the book, The Millionaire Real Estate Agent. And one of the things he talks about in that book is when you have someone's system, make sure that you master the system, or that you utilize the system the way they designed it first, and that you do, let's say 80-90% of whatever that system is first, that you implement that, you build that up, you achieve a certain level of success from that system. And then once you've built that foundational level of success from, utilizing that system exactly as it is written or as it is designed, then once you start having success, then you can tweak just a little bit, but no more than maybe 10 to 15% do you want to tweak. And that tweak is just, maybe you see, or maybe you think that there's a way to do something better, or maybe you see that, hey, I can pivot over here, or maybe I could add in this extra lane over there. But you don't want to change the entire system, because the system is there for a reason and it works if you work it. So along with having 2 or 3 mentors, Mike's saying, hey, don't get bogged down with having too much influence on you as far as your business goes. Pick a couple of people that you really respect and dive deep into their material, dive deep into what it is that they think, their beliefs, their mindsets, and then be open to changing once you learn those things. Next note, Mike says, nothing beats starting a day faster than a minimum amount of prospecting, right? I think we all know that. And he says, right after that, the next point is have a strong morning routine. And when he says have a strong morning routine, he wanted to clarify because, again, we live in the internet age where everybody thinks we're talking about a cold plunge, or, maybe having a iced cafe mocha latte at 7 a.m. or, I don't know, doing your yoga or doing your visualizations or incantations, if you will, right? Talking to yourself. But what Mike would consider as a strong morning routine would be prospecting, lead, follow-up. That's the strong morning routine that he's referring to. So he says, have a strong morning routine. And I think we all know that any of us that have done it for a period of time or continually do it for a period of time, we know that, hey, if we just follow that 2, 3, 4 hours of prospecting every morning, then, and we do that consistently, then everything else more or less takes care of itself, right? And even if it doesn't, well, there's just new business, new opportunities coming in anyway to replace whatever didn't close or whatever fell apart, right? Always another train coming, always another bus coming is what we need to remember. Control what goes on inside of your head, right? So Mike says you do that by the audios you listen to, the books that you're reading, and also the people that you associate with. And Mike even went so far as to share that if you have anything negative to say, he'll give you maybe 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds. And if he realizes that this conversation is going down, you complaining or how bad life is or your problems, he's just going to interrupt you and either leave or hang up the phone or something, right? So he used the example of, if somebody's family friend calls him and they're complaining about something, he'll just hang up. And, if they call back, he'll say, oh, I'm sorry, we got disconnected. And if they go back to complaining, blah, 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 hang up again. And, if they pick back up or call him again, he'll ask and redirect to ask to, hey, how's this going? Or how's that going? Or tell me more about this, right? So he's always protecting his mindset as far as, obviously reading books, listening to tapes or audios, podcasts, whatever you want to call it nowadays. but also even in his conversations with other people, he tries to eliminate or at least protect himself from hearing a lot of negativity from people, whether that be family, friends, or clients, right? So that is something that Mike really wanted to harp on. Next would be your daily schedule will eliminate the highs and lows of real estate. So we all know that sometimes the market's in our favor, sometimes the market may not necessarily be in our favor, i.e. Seller's market versus buyer's market. We all have our preferences there. But the roller coaster of income, Mike says your daily schedule will eliminate that, right? And you'll be more even keeled the more consistent you are, right? He says learn to program yourself to stay motivated. So we all heard motivation doesn't last, neither does bathing. That's why I recommend it every day. That's something I think Zig Ziglar said. And it's true, most times, and it's something I had to learn and still am learning or, am being reminded of, is that, even the people that I admire in real estate, some of the top producers, they're not even producers anymore per se as far as a single agent, but now they own teams or brokerages and multiple brokerages. But the idea that nobody loves prospecting, relatively speaking, right? And obviously we hear some people say, I love prospecting, because they're excited about the results. But the truth is, if there was a way that we could produce the same results without having to get on the phone and cold call people and, have some people say, no, not interested, never do business, blah, 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 we would do that other way. That was easier, right? But the truth is that's what creates the advantage is most people aren't willing to do it. And so, once we have the skills and we're consistent with it, then we can produce a lot of income, and that's what a lot of people love. But learn to program yourself is what Mike says. Quit looking at money per transaction, and your income will increase. And this is very true, on multiple facets. So I'd like to just hop on this for just a moment. And I'm sorry if clicking my pen is coming on and kind of irritating your ear. But when you start looking at money per transaction, this is something I realized. When you're looking at money per transaction, for one, you're looking at a result that you can't control, right? Because, obviously we can negotiate within reason a price and maybe get 5,000, 10,000 more, depending on the price point you're at, right? Maybe if you're $1 million, maybe you can get 50,000 or 100,000 more or less, whatever, if you're on the buyer side, right? But what I found, especially with agents that I talk to, when you go up higher, and guys, you gotta remember, I'm building in South Florida, but I did real estate in Hawaii for 7 years. And in Hawaii, the average or the median single family home price got as high as 1.2 million. It's hovering about 1.1 million right now. So I only share that to say a $1.1 million house in Hawaii is it's a 4-bedroom, 3-bath, 2,000 square feet house, maybe. And with maybe 7,000 square feet of land and a 2-car garage, right? Nothing fancy. And that'll be, wow, man, it doesn't feel like it, but now that'll be, 10, 11 years old, something built in the 2011s, 2010. So that's what that will be, right? So anyway, I'm just describing that type of house because it's nothing special, basically, is what I'm getting at. That's my point. And so for me, coming from that environment, a $1-2 million listing, it's not all that, 1.5, 1.6, it's normal. It's a normal house. But in some other markets, say like maybe Nashville, or I've got a buddy that sells real estate in Columbia, South Carolina. And when you talk about Columbia, South Carolina, I mean, you can still buy a pretty large house for $300,000-$400,000. And for $500,000, I think you can buy a brand new mansion, if I'm not mistaken, right? So for someone like that, when they look at, let's say, $1 million listing or $2 million listing, they go, oh my gosh, what do I do? I gotta tap dance. I gotta be different. I gotta be special, or, I gotta drive a Rolls Royce. And it's like, no, it's the same. If anything, it'll be easier. You do have to know your stuff. They are a little bit more knowledgeable. Most times it's not necessarily their first time buying a house or selling one. But outside of that, they don't know any more than you do. And even the ones that think they do, if you know your stats, and that's a whole different conversation when we talk about stats, but if you know your stats, you know your numbers, you're good to go, you can close, and they'll be happy to refer you business, right? So it makes me think of that when Mike says, quit looking at money per transaction. The other part of that conversation is when you look at the money, we all have a financial thermostat. I don't care who you are, you have a financial thermostat. And coming from certain backgrounds, it might be lower than others. But no matter who you are, you have a financial thermostat where you go, this is plenty enough money for me. And with the larger transactions, especially north of $1 million, when you're talking about getting a $30, $40, $50, $60,000 check at once, that's someone's annual salary still today, not necessarily a lot of people, right? Because as inflation's going, income's going up too, relatively speaking, right? But at the same time, still $30, $40, $50,000 is still what someone makes in a year, depending on where you live. And so to see that come in, some people, they're gonna pump the brakes, or they're gonna ease off the gas a little bit, take it easy, because hey, that's enough to pay their bills for 3 months or 6 months, right? And so they're not going to be as hungry. So Mike says, if you focus on the amount of transactions that you're doing, or you focus on your daily goals, let's say maybe whether it's 20, 30, 40, 50 contacts a day, or whether it's a certain number of listings taken per week, or certain number of appointments set per week, or whatever. If you focus on that metric rather than looking at the amount of money per transaction you're making, then you're going to make more money. So that was his point, is that you're going to make more money when you stop looking at the per transaction, and for all the reasons that I've mentioned. Also, that reminded me of another thought, which I think I'm going to tie in here from this guy, Justin Torres. I think Justin was the one that said it. Was it Justin? Maybe it was somebody else. Yeah. It was, I think it was Justin, but it doesn't matter. Essentially, this person said, focus on the engine that produces the outcome, not the individual client that might hand you a big check. And so that thought ties in what Mike says about, and that thought came from, I believe, Justin Torres was one of the gentlemen that, Mike brings up these awesome agents from around the U.S. and interviews them. And so this is one of the guys that was interviewed, and he had that thought of, hey, focus on the engine that produces the outcome, not the individual client that might hand you a big check. And the reason that conversation came up is because Mike loves to give the example where, hey, I've got this wonderful client, or this $2-3 million listing, or this $2-3 million buyer that wants to meet with me on Thursday morning at 9 a.m. or wants me to come do the listing presentation at 9 a.m. during my prospecting hours, right? And so this agent, Justin, he said, hey, look, I'm not going to take that appointment. I'm going to set it for later in the afternoon. And if they insist, well, then I'll just skip that, and I'll just have to miss out on that business. And, some people gasp at that because, hey, it is something to be said about, skipping out on a potential $30,000 to $50,000 check, right? An opportunity. And that's why he said, hey, I'm focusing on the engine, not the individual client, right? That can hand me one big check, right? And so if you're focusing on, once again, the transactions that you're doing, if you're focused on the amount of contacts you got to make, listings you got to take, appointments you got to set, however, whatever, whatever front end leading indicator that you have, then you're going to do so much more business, right? So just want to kind of belabor that point because to me it's so important and such a huge mindset shift because it really will help you out when you don't pay attention to this $40,000, $50,000 check. You'll also you'll find that you also treat your clients more or less the same, right? So you'll stop thinking, oh, it's my $1 million listing or it's my $2 million listing client. I better answer, better jump through hoops versus it's just $500,000, it's just 300,000, whatever, I'll get to them, right? So whatever your standard is, you're just going to start treating everyone the same and stop, kind of looking at it as a luxury property or a non-luxury property or whatever. You're just going to go say, hey, this is another house that I'm selling. So that's huge, at least to me it is. Next thought. Get a good assistant to support you. Mike says get one for every 40 deals that you do. So he says up until about 40 deals you can do it on your own, but at 40 deals you should hire an assistant. Another thought on that: Josh Barker, another great realtor out in I believe it's Redding, California, if I'm not mistaken. Forgive me if it's the wrong location, but I think it's Redding, California. He's a broker now, but he's still doing real estate sales himself for his team, to be an example for his team. And he says, if you know for sure that you're serious about this business and you're going to do what is required to build a big business, then just start off right out the gate. Get your assistant as soon as you possibly can, right? And he also says that, like what Mike's saying, with every 40, if you're at 40 and you know that you want to get to 80 or 100, just go ahead and hire that second assistant off the bat, right? Also, another key with hiring that assistant is spend at least 30 minutes every week trading them, going over files with them together. So Mike harps on, and even Josh mentioned it, don't just get an assistant and then just hand them your paperwork or your administrative tasks and just say, hey, good luck, figure it out, right? Actually trade them and show them what you expect. And if you do that, you'll find that you're building a system. And I've also learned from other business owners, but a standard operating procedure. So maybe in the beginning you don't have that because you're just building it. But one of the things my coach taught me was, he said, document everything. And essentially what you can do is you can have your assistant do it. You don't have to do it, but you can just have your assistant go, okay, you get a listing. Okay, what do you need, or how do you input a listing into the MLS? Well, write down step-by-step instructions where you could hand this to, let's say, a high schooler, someone that's working at McDonald's. They can know nothing at all about real estate, but you could hand them this sheet of paper and they could read step by step and input a listing into the MLS without knowing anything about real estate, right? And so when you have that procedure, now it's not so much that, you want a great assistant, don't get me wrong, people matter, but you want that system to where if your assistant leaves or goes or gets sick or whatever, you got a playbook that you can hand to anybody with a brain and they can execute it to a certain standard, right? And not make mistakes. So that is a big key with assistants, is train them, but also have them help you build your system as you're growing. Obviously, Mike always talks about scripts. Scripts are important. A second thought on that about scripts are important. My friend Caesar out in California said, he says, everyone has more or less the same scripts. It's not too hard to memorize the scripts, but it's the tonality that you use. And to me, that even for me, that was like a huge reminder, but also a huge key. It's like the tonality that you use two people can say the same script and get different outcomes. Now, Mike, he likes to use the B word. I don't curse like that. So, but if I can remember correctly, Mike always loves to say "you be," right? And he's saying the B word, "you be." And if you say that to someone, the way your tonality, right? You could say "you be," or you could say "you be." Right? So it's the tonality. And it probably doesn't sound as good without me saying the word, right? And you could say, son of a bee. Or you son of a bee. Right? But the tonality changes the meaning behind, even though you said the same thing. Because you could say, you son of a bee. Or you could say, you son of a bee. Right? So it gives you a different feeling. And it's the same with your questions. How did you determine your sales price? Right? You could sound like, man, how'd you come up with that sales price? Or you could sound confused. Hey, how did you come up with the sales price? Right? So one sounds a little combative, other sounds questioning, curiosity. And so I would say, yeah, scripts are important. But more importantly is the tonality in which you use. And one of the big things my coach always taught me is a downswing. So even you guys remember the old school, even, just hammer down, I guess a little Thor hammer, if you will, to help you really emphasize that downswing because it gives you authority, right? When do you plan on interviewing the right agent for the job of selling your home? Right, but the home has always got to be a downswing, not an upswing, right? Because the job of selling your home, right? So it sounds more like a question, sounds more like non-confident, right? And so just remember that scripts, it's the tonality. That's what you really got to practice, and that can only come with, you guys know, role play, but also recording yourself and then listening. That was challenging, but I liken that to watching film on yourself just like an athlete would, right? Rewatching the game and listening. Excuse me, I'm gonna take a sip here. Keep your emotions in between the lines. Mike always talks about keeping your emotions in check. Your job is to be the calming force in a transaction. One of the things I thought that was interesting this time is he says, you can be upset, but be upset by yourself alone with no one listening, right? So obviously sometimes in transactions, you got different agents, you got different clients, you got escrow, you got title, you got your lender, you got your so on and so forth, inspector, whatever. And the better you are at keeping your emotions in between the lines, keeping your emotions in check and objectively just moving the transaction forward and pushing to close, the better off you be, right? And the best example is offers, right? Lowball offer, seller's upset, offended. Well, hey, it's okay. You don't have to accept the offer. But what does it hurt for them to try to get a discount? See if maybe you might say yes. Maybe you might be desperate, right? Or if you're on the buy side, hey, look, man, just FYI, offer coming in is going to be a bit lower. We understand that, but it's worth a shot just to see if your seller might entertain it. And obviously, we could have a conversation all day, but it doesn't mean anything unless there's, pen to paper. So here's that offer. Here's the contract. Just let your seller know. We just wanting to see if he's willing to play ball. If not, no harm, no foul, right? No need to get all upset. No need to get all offended, right? And you as an agent as well, not getting upset, not getting offended if another agent presents that with you, right? Hey, how dare you offer this to my seller? Your job is to present the offer, period. Get out of your feelings. And that can be in so many different scenarios with real estate, but that's just one that comes to my mind. The story you tell yourself is the largest obstacle you face every day. And that's so true. It's so true. Every great agent that I am aware of, it seems simple, but the more I study the Mike Ferry system, the more I study fellow top producers, it's like, it's little things, guys. It's little things. I was actually squatting the other day, lifting weights. And I'm doing 385 pounds, right? I just happened to decide that day I wanted to try to max out and just see, where I am. And I'm like gonna squat 300, I believe it was 385 pounds. And I thought to myself, the first thought I had was it's lightweight. So I never really thought about it until, Mike mentioned this, and I kind of brought all this together. But every time I've been lifting weights off and on for years, since like high school. And something I always tell myself when the weights are heavier is, and I think that's something I learned in high school. We used to always say that to each other to kind of motivate each other, playing football. It's like, yo, man, it's lightweight, baby. It's lightweight, it's nothing. It's lightweight, right? But in our heads, we know, like, dude, this is 300 pounds, 400 pounds, 500, 600. I've even seen guys, squat 700 pounds. It's insane, right? But you're like, dude, it's lightweight, baby. Let's go. Right. And so it's something I always say to myself, like, it's lightweight. And I remember the other day, I said to myself, it's lightweight. Right. And then I think 2 seconds later, as I'm shifting the bar on the squat rack, to get in position, my mind is like, nah, this is not lightweight. Right. And I kind of chuckled to myself. As I'm, getting in position. But what's very interesting about that is that first rep that I tried at 385, I dropped it. Meaning, like, I went down, squatted, couldn't get back up, had to put it on the rack, right? Just on the safety bars, let it fall. And it was mental, right? Because I thought to myself, like, wow, you took an extra second or two to get this off your back. Obviously, you got the strength to push this back up, but mentally, your confidence just wasn't there mentally. Now, granted, I also wasn't using a spotter, like a physical person spotting me, so that played a part. I don't squat with a belt, so also, don't have that belt to just give you that extra little, feeling of certainty, right? So it doesn't have a belt, don't have a personal squatter, and I'm maxing out, right? So mentally, it's a little bit scarier, right? Now, what's interesting about this is I had to take all that weight off the bar, right? So 300 some pounds off the bar, pick this bar up, put it back on the rack, put all those plates back on to beat 385, rest for, I don't know, another minute or 2 minutes, and guess what happened? The second time I was like, hey, let's do this. Let's just do it like you can squat, just bounce down, get in there, drive up like you're gonna get it. And what's interesting is the second time around, I actually got it. Same day, same workout, maybe 5-7 minutes later, after dropping it the first time around. And the reality was, it was the story that I was telling myself. The story originally, I didn't tell myself that I couldn't, but the story I told myself was, this weight is heavy, right? I said it, hey, this weight is lightweight. But then my very next thought after that was, nah, no, it ain't, right? And I even kind of chuckled because my body's like, nah, this ain't lightweight, homie, right? And so when you think about whether it's you're prospecting, whether you're going on appointment, like what is the story that you're telling yourself, right? And so many great agents I can think of, like I think is Brianne Llewellyn, Karen Bernardi. They talk about, I think, Brianne Llewellyn. Oh, I'm sorry, she's not Brianne Llewellyn anymore. She's Brianne Green. She talks about before when she was dialing, when she was prospecting, she's saying, "This is going to be my next listing appointment. This is my next listing appointment. This is my next listing appointment." Every time the phone's ringing, like, "This is my next listing appointment," right? That's what she's saying to herself, right? And so you think about how she approaches the call, what type of energy she gives, and let's say handling any type of objections, or what type of energy she gives and going for the appointment when she's constantly telling herself, um, "Hey, this is going to be my next listing appointment. This is going to be my next listing appointment." Versus, I remember when I first started getting on phones, oh man, I was terrible with the stories that I told myself. I would be like, man, they're not going to list. They're not going to set an appointment, right? They're going to cuss me out. You know, they're not going to want to hear from me, right? And it was a horrible story to tell yourself, right? So, as you could imagine, how hard would I be pushing for an appointment when I'm telling myself that, right? And then furthermore, same thing when it comes to listing, a big one when it comes to listing appointments, right? Like when you're heading out to an appointment, what are you saying to yourself? Are you saying, "Oh man, this seller's going to fight me. You know, this seller is going to want to overprice this. They're, only going to want to give me a 6-month contract or whatever," right? Or are you going in there like, "I'm going to take this listing at a great price and it's going to sell quick," right? This seller's going to give me, my full contract, full commission, great price, and it's going to sell quickly, right? Like, which one are you telling yourself, right? And so if you're telling yourself the latter, like, hey, they're going to be excited to work with me, they're going to want to price it right, it's going to sell quickly, then what type of energy do you go on that appointment with versus, they're going to want to overprice it, they're only going to want to do a 3-month contract, I'm going to have to go back and forth with them, like, what type of energy do you have? So it's so key. The story you tell yourself is the largest obstacle you face every day, right? And also a reminder, going back to the note, sellers will always have the same objections, so learn the 2-3 handlers, you're good to go. Your skills always get better with practice. Remember to define what a lead is to you. It's different for everybody, but whether it's someone that's going to sign a contract in the next 7 to 10 days, next 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, a year, I don't know that you can go further than a year, right? But how do you determine what it is a lead is to you? And Mike obviously always says the more business you want to do, then the tighter or shorter that window of time for a lead should be. So if you want to do 100, 200, 300 deals, then the definition of a lead cannot be 6 months. It could be maybe a month, max probably, because I've never done 100. But probably 30 days max, but really probably more like 7 to 10 days, maybe 14 days, right? If you're only trying to do 20, 30 deals, then obviously you can go to 6 months or a year or 9 months or whatever, because you're not trying to do as many transactions. Pricing is the strongest marketing tool you have. And I think that's something that even within the MFO organization, I hear people talk about their marketing, the amount of money they spend, blah, blah, blah. Not a lot, just a couple. But pricing is all that matters. And the example I always use with clients is Michael Jordan's house. His house has been for sale, I think, for 10 years. I haven't checked recently to see if it's sold, but it's Michael Jordan, right? It's been on ESPN, it's been on CNN News, NBC, it's been in Sports Illustrated, it's every major magazine you could think of, it's every major website, network, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Marketing is not the issue with Michael Jordan's house, I assure you. Yet, it can't sell. Why? Because it's overpriced, period. It doesn't matter if Michael Jordan lived in there, still overpriced, right? So it hasn't sold. So, especially in the market that we're in now, granted, it depends on, some markets are better than others overall, right? Meaning like your state, your individual city, town, or township, right? Or parish. But the overall market is a more normal market, right? We're not in the 21 market anymore. We're not in the COVID market anymore, right? Where you could just say for sale and then you get 20 offers, right? Like I still hear of quick sales. I'm still seeing quick sales, and when I say quick, I mean within 14 days, right? But you're not. I'm not aware of anybody that's setting a offer deadline. Like you listing your property today, you got an offer deadline 7 days from now, and you're like, we'll be reviewing offers and making a decision, and you and your seller sitting back, chilling, saying, hey, look, oh my gosh, look here, look at this, oh, look at this offer, ooh, look at that one, wow, look at the, ooh, that's crazy, right? And then you're sitting down going, gosh, I wouldn't pay that for this house, and I live here, right? Like we're not in that type of market. So just remember, pricing, strongest marketing tool that you have. Obviously, you want professional photos, etc. You want to be on the most of the major websites and everything MLS, but pricing, that's really your only issue. Remember, there's no secret sauce. Just work the system. Consistency is a big key. Justin always says too, how we think determines how we feel. How we feel determines what we do. What we do determines what we become. Right? So remember, how you think determines how you feel. How you feel determines what you do. What you do determines what you become. Remember, the market doesn't decide your income. You decide your income and then make a plan to execute it. And that's a big key, especially for newer agents. Doesn't matter what the market's doing, more or less, right? I mean, it has some effect, but the effect is negligible, relatively speaking. It's all about your goals. So if you want to net $1 million or $500,000 or 100,000, then there's a plan that you put in place to execute that. Period. And then the market might determine what you have to do, right? And then I think I've heard that before at a different event, different superstar retreat. But a gentleman said, the market does not determine your income. The market determines what is required of you to accomplish that income, right? Or to earn that income, right? So your market doesn't determine your income at all, right? So you just have to decide what you want to make, and then the market determines what's required for you to make that, right? So maybe in this market, you might have to take a few more listings to sell more listings, because you're probably not going to go 100% per se in this market, right? A few might not sell, a few might cancel, might expire, whatever. It shouldn't be expired because you should know your price reduction, but still, you get my drift. But just know that, hey, you decide your income and then you execute the plan, adjust, maybe every 90 days, every quarter, or maybe every 30 days, depending on how, quickly you want to look at your results, because obviously you got to give it time. But as you're adjusting on the fly, then you should get pretty close to hitting your goals, if not exceeding your income goal. All right, starting to wrap up to the last page for day one. Effective lead follow-up. Mike always says, do we lose more business by not being aggressive enough or by being too aggressive, right? And so by being aggressive, we're making sure that we're there and not allow another agent to provide them less service that won't, take care of them and give them the service that they deserve. Note, also, Mike always says, dress professionally. It changes the response. Sometimes, especially, I know being in Hawaii, a lot of people wear the aloha shirts. A lot of people, many people don't even own a suit. And when I say own a suit, I mean you meet grown men that have gone their entire lives and never owned a suit. So I feel like a lot of times, forget the presentation, like just showing up with the, suit and tie. Um, I want a listing right there because people are like, oh, you didn't have to dress up, and I just straight up tell her, so hey, look, you're getting ready to pay me 30,000. Yes, I would say the number. I say, hey, you're getting ready to pay me $30,000. Like if I was going to apply for a job at McDonald's to make $30,000 a year, I would dress a certain way, right? Don't you deserve that? And most sellers would appreciate that. So I know it definitely makes a difference. Granted, over here, uh, and when I say over here, I'm talking about the rest of the U.S. outside of Hawaii and maybe Alaska. Suits are a little more common, but again, your competition, there are a lot of realtors that want to embody the Facebook or Google type of environment where, there is no corporate attire, suit and necktie, but just telling you that professionalism definitely does matter. Stop talking about yourself to clients. I've never been the one to do that, but I can certainly tell you I've had clients that I have, former expireds and things like that have shared with me, hey man, you're the only one that didn't brag to me about blah 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 blah, right? And I've always had this idea. I've never shared it with a client, but I've always had this idea in my head that if I sold 99 out of 100 homes, how would that client feel about me? Or no, let me back up a little bit. Let me make sure I say that correctly. If I sold 99 out of 100 homes, would you think that I'm a pretty good listing agent, pretty skilled listing agent? And I think most people would say, yeah, you probably know what you're doing if you're selling 99 out of 100, right? But then I always think to myself, like, but how does that client feel about me if theirs is the one out of 100 that I couldn't sell or didn't sell, right? And so I look at it as, well, best case, they're going to say, well, he sold 99 out of 100, but he couldn't sell mine, right? Or, I don't know, something just didn't go right for mine, but I don't know why he couldn't sell mine if he could sell the other 99, right? But the point is that client whose house that you didn't sell out of the 100 would have a very bitter or sour taste in their mouth for you if you couldn't sell their home or were unable to sell their home, even if you did sell 99 out of 100. So I've always had that mindset when it comes down to, let's say, quote unquote, bragging about how many homes you sell, how many deals you do, transactions, blah, 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 blah. Sure, you can use it to say, hey, I'm competent in what I do. But more importantly, just remember, it's that individual client's property or the transaction on their home. That's what matters to them. Doesn't really matter that you've sold 100, 1,000, 10,000. Doesn't matter that you haven't sold any. They might feel a little less confident in you, but there's ways that you can respond to negate that, right? And you can lean on your brokerage, other agents. But the point is, focus on the result of, hey, you need to move to Alabama, you need to move to Texas. My plan is going to get you there with the most amount of money in a time frame that you want. Won't that be great, right? Another one that this is more of a skill thing, or a tactic or strategy, if you will, says rate your inventory every month, write down the target price that each listing should be at. So some of these guys, I'm not there yet, but some of these guys are carrying 20, 30 listings at a time, right? And so Mike says, you should rate your inventory every month. If you want to be more aggressive, maybe even every week. But you're looking at it and you've got your listings, and then you're writing down, okay, based on what I'm seeing in today's market, based on the stats I'm seeing today, right now, because it's adjusting, right? What price should they be at? What's the target price? And that also reminds me this is something I learned from Larry Kozak, but when you talk about price reductions, talking percentages instead of numbers. So Larry says, ask for 10% reduction, expecting that they're going to push back and give you a 5% reduction. But don't ask for 5 because it needs 5, and then now they're fighting you and they're trying to get you down to 3 or 2% or whatever. It's like, ask for 10, let them fight you, kick, get it down to 5. But maybe they might go for 10, depending on how you've been communicating with them, their motivation, right, and also what they think you have or haven't done, right? So if you're communicating properly, and they know that it's not you, and they see, and they're motivated, then maybe you might be able to get that 10% right off the bat, right? Especially if you prepped them ahead of time and said, hey, this is a real possibility at the listing table, right? Hey, this is the type of market that we're in. So just something to remember. Practice during and prior to your presentation. So you always practice in your listing presentation, but also if you can get there a few minutes early, practice, just run through your presentation right before you actually go on the listing appointment, or right before you present the listing appointment. Just do a quick rundown, quick practice. And also something I learned for different gentlemen there at the event was, even for phone calls, whether it's price reduction, whether it's accepted an offer, or whether you've got a offer that's below asking, but you still think it's solid and you want the seller to accept it, just rehearse those conversations a little bit in your head, or even out loud a few minutes before you're actually going to do the call. So you just have more confidence, and just think up whatever objections or whatever might come up or questions, and just kind of walk through that, so that by the time you're on the phone with that person, you're prepared, you're ready. This is that more confidence, because you just ran through it. You just covered whatever questions that you think might come up or objections might come up, and you're ready for it, right? Yeah, I think that's all my notes for J1. Well, we got one more page. Let's see. If you want to develop confidence, you have to develop discipline. Discipline is what creates confidence. Set expectations for sellers up front, especially in this market. You just let them know right at the listing table after they sign, hey, listen, you might get some offers for less than you expect. Set the expectations up front. Maybe even preempt the price reduction. You may say, hey, look, I'm going to execute my marketing plan. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you everything that I do when I do it. And then after that, if 2 weeks have gone by, 3 weeks have gone by, we're not getting any activity, then we probably need to look at doing that 10% reduction on the price, right? But we're going to do everything we can to get this price first, because it is, based on today's stat, this is the market price, right? But just kind of prepare them for that, so that now they're not blindsided by it, right? Another thing, this one's really key for me, is you can be right or you can be rich. And I put in parentheses because Mike says this, about 90% of the time you are right, but who cares, right? So that's a huge one for me. I'm still working on that one, but being right or rich. And so what that means is you don't win when you make the seller wrong or the client wrong and yourself right. So that's why it says you can be right or rich, because anytime you make the client wrong, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, they don't like that. And so because they don't like that, now there's more friction, and maybe they may not hire you. Maybe they don't want to work with you. If they are working with you, then maybe they don't want to listen as much now, because now, you offended them by making them wrong, right? And no one wants to be wrong. So you have to learn how to challenge a prospect or client without making them wrong. So you do that by asking questions. Instead of saying, hey, no, Bob, there's no way you're getting $1 million into today's market, you could say, hey, Bob, what's got you stuck on $1 million? Like, maybe I'm not, maybe I'm not doing a great job of explaining this market analysis to you, right? But But where are you getting a $1 million valuation from for your home based on what you see here? Like, what am I missing? Or like, help me see what it is that you see, because I certainly want to make sure we list your home at a price, at the max price that we can, net you the most amount of money. However, I'm not quite seeing the million that you're seeing, right? Like, you don't make them wrong, but you can still challenge them on what it is that they're telling you, right? Um, and then once again, I wrote down, be the calming force in a transaction, support everything with data. And then last notes I wrote for day one was, people come to decisions by their own ideas, so ask a lot of questions. Essentially, the age old selling is not telling, but also the fact that selling is not telling, but also the fact that you're not convincing them to sell their home. You're not convincing them to buy a home. You might create a sense of urgency by the questions that you ask, right? So I'll give you an example. You might say, well, hey, listen, Isaac, you sound like a great agent. We want to sell in December. Now, you could say, hey, look, man, why would you wait till December? Like, who knows what's going to happen? Like, why don't you sell today? You got a great amount of equity. You could be in Florida right now, and you could skip winter in Alaska altogether, right? Or you could say, well, what's important to you about waiting till December, right? Why don't you want this sooner? And they could say A, B, C, D, or whatever. And if it's not a contingency, like, hey, I cannot move until my son graduates, or, I've got this job transfer that doesn't start until whatever, then you can go say, hey, well, if there was an advantage to selling now and moving to Florida rather than waiting until December, would you want to know about it, right? Would you rather be in Florida sooner if you could? Like, what's stopping you from selling today, or maybe in the next 30 days, right? And so when you ask those questions, sometimes, at least in my experience, what I found is that maybe that timeline is not necessarily a hard timeline, but it is more so a lack of information, right? We're not quite sure what we got to do to get this ball rolling, but we think we need to do A, B, C, D. But when you actually sit down with them and you get this information, boom. Or, if it's expired and then, hey, you're thinking about renting it out, or they just want to sit off and cool off for 30 days or something, there's some questions you could ask there to say, hey, what are you planning on changing? Maybe we show you a different approach and you can get the money that you want within the next 2 weeks rather than waiting 2 months. Wouldn't that be great, right? Or would you like to take a few minutes to meet with me, show you how I can do that, right? So when you ask those questions, you're not telling them, you're not convincing them, but you can create a sense of urgency by the questions you ask. And also, a great one to ask is, well, what happens if you don't sell? Or what happens if you don't get to Florida by this time? Or what happens if you don't get an offer in the first 10 days the way you expect? With that, blah, blah, blah. Maybe you want to give yourself a little more time and list sooner so that you can be on the market and actually have a little time to maybe try to wait out to get this higher price that you want, right? Whatever it is. But asking questions is the key to leading them and realizing that they're going to come to a decision based on their own ideas, not by you telling them and giving them ideas. So guys, that's my time for today. Didn't plan to go for an hour. I thought it'd be 30 minutes, but I'm a little long-winded. But those are all my notes for day one, or majority of the highlighted notes that I made for day one. It was an exciting event, guys. It was a really exciting event. I felt like at the end of day one, like I could have left Vegas at the end of day one and I would have felt that I got my money's worth out of the event, honestly. Just seeing Mike present, the interview with Justin, and just the mindset and the reminders of the foundations, guys. And this is something that I learned from Marcellus. I think he's out there in Jacksonville. He used to work for the Boston Celtics. And I'll never forget that Marcellus shared this with us on a call. But he said, "Hey man, all the stars of the NBA," and granted, this was I want to say back in 2011. So this is back when Boston Celtics was like Rajon Rondo was brand new. You talking like Kevin Garnett, you know what I'm saying? Like Paul Pierce, I think it was Ray Allen too, if I'm not mistaken, with the Celtics. But I mean, just heavy hitters, and I mean they were, one game away, one series away from going to the NBA Finals every season, like that. Those days, that's when he was with the Celtics. And one of the things he shared with us on a call was there's all the stars of the game, the NBA stars, after practice, they take 1,000 shots around the loop. They'll take 1,000 shots around the 3-point line. He's like, they'll stand there and they'll dribble the ball with their right hand, 400 or 500 times, with their left hand 400 or 500 times. And he said, none of this fancy between the legs, none of this trick shot and all this. He was like, they're going to go to the foul line and take 1,000 shots. They're going to walk up and down the court just dribbling the ball. And he was like, they do that every day. And I remember thinking to myself, man, how boring. How boring does that sound? But I also was shocked because I would think that someone like Kobe Bryant, especially, or someone like Kevin Garnett, that they would be, practicing some trick shots. They would be, practicing some behind the back dribble or something. Like they would be, I don't know, trying to figure out how to spin the ball on one finger or the pinky finger and, flick it and get it into the, like whatever, right? Like hit the elbow and, top the head and, like a soccer ball or something. Like I thought they would be trying to do all of that. And he was like, nah, the basics. 1,000 shots here, 1,000 shots there, dribbling the ball right here. Like you in elementary school or middle school, you just learned how to play basketball. And your coach is like, nope, I want you to practice dribbling this 400-500 times. I want you to get this down. He's like, that's what the stars of the game do. That's what they practice. The basics. After practice, on their own. And this is after practice. This is what they do on their own. This is their extra spare time that they don't have to do, but this is what they do, and this is what makes them great. This is what makes them the star. And I say all that to say that day one is Mike reminding us of the basics. To not get too fancy, to not try to focus on the no-look pass or whatever, right? But to remember real estate is very simple. Prospect every day. You got to talk to people every day. Prospect, lead follow-up, go on appointments, present, negotiate offers, right? So prospect, lead follow-up, go on appointments, negotiate offers. And some people don't even negotiate offers. They got a team or transaction coordinator, whoever, to do it for them. But to remember those basics. And I would say that's why I keep going back, and I think that's why a lot of people keep going back, because in the world that we live in with social media and all the different, venues or people that pull on you and tug on you to say, hey, there's a better way, there's an easier way, there's a way where you don't have to work to do, a lot of transactions. It can be quote unquote tempting, but coming back to Mike's event, it's always like, hey, the basics still work, right? People are still getting results, and not even quote unquote veterans, but new people, young folks, they're in their 20s. They've only been in business a year, 2 years, and they're doing $250,000, $300,000. And these are kids that grew up with technology, and they're making cold calls. And so it's really a reminder, but it's also, social proof that, hey, it still works. And it's just a reminder that, hey, the system works if you work it. And so it's just always a great reminder, great reinvigoration of your belief in what it is that you're doing. And then there's always a couple takeaways that, you individual personally that you can go, hey, I can implement this, or I can make this change that's going to make a huge difference in my sales production. So with that, guys, I will catch you next week with day 2 notes. Hope that helps. Give me feedback, on the video. Give me some of your thoughts on some of the notes that I did share. I would love to hear what you have to say. You guys know how to reach me if you want to, add in a role play partner, or if you just want to do one role play. I'm building in South Florida, so it's going to be Fort Lauderdale, Boca Raton area. That's where I'm building at. So if you got referrals, send them to me. I'd be happy to help them out. And wherever you are, if I do have your information, I will certainly send clients to you when that time comes. All right, guys, so next video, take care.